Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining our session today for SLF 2022. So this session just now is safeguarding learner wellbeing, and we're going to hear from our colleagues at Greif High School in Renfrewshire, who are going to share their journey with us in relation to supporting learner wellbeing. So just very quickly, just run through some of the protocols for us, just a reminder that the session's being recorded and that you can use the chat pane. I'm going to be monitoring the chat pane, so if you've got any questions for the team that's going to be sharing their story with you today, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat function, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time towards the end to hear from them. But I know you don't want to hear from me just now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Sheena and the team to tell us their journey in safeguarding learner wellbeing. So over to you, Sheena, and I'll stop sharing the screen and I'll pop my mic off.
Afternoon, everybody. Lorna, can you see my slides okay? Excellent. Afternoon. I'm going to start off with a little hello from the four of us that are here. My name's Sheena Costello. I'm Principal Teacher of Wellbeing at Greif High. This is Lizzie O'Hara, who is our art teacher and support for learning teacher. And our two young people that we have today is Jenna and Katrina, who are our S6 Wellbeing leads. So we're all kind of squeezed into this wee box. What we're trying to do is give you a very kind of a brief introduction to the Glasgow Motivation and Wellbeing profile. Now, we're very aware that when it comes to safeguarding and making sure that we're getting it right for every young child or young person in our care, when it comes to well-being, yes, it's a massive priority, but having the measurement and having a tool that helps us with that approach is vital. So we would like to speak for a long length of time in relation to this profile, but we know that we've only got a limited period of 45 minutes. So we've kind of split it up to make it a wee bit kind of user-friendly for you. We're also very aware that lots of you may have never really touched base with the wellbeing profile before. And I know Lorna's going to put up some links for you to find out more information, and we've got links at the end of the presentation as well that you can follow some more information up for. Okay, so kind of briefly what we're going to do is we're going to show you how we've implemented the profile within the school, and then Lizzie's going to talk about the impact, which is probably one of the most important aspects that you'll be kind of wanting to know about. And then our young people, Jenna and Katrina, is going to give you an invite to think and be curious about the use of the profile. What we very much did, so as it says, in October 2020, we initially received some training from the authority, from Renfrewshire Authority, and I'd already been in post for about 2 or 3 years beforehand, and we very much used what other schools were using in relation to wellbeing indicators and making sure that we were monitoring our young people's well-being via these indicators. But when we went on to the training, we realised that the actual profile itself, and I remember somebody saying this on the day that we got the training, does all of the kind of data collection for us. So it does all the data collection, and then we get to analyse it. So it was great. So as soon as we were introduced to it, we knew it was the profile, it was the measurement tool that we've been sitting about for many a decade waiting for. So we trialled the profile gently in the period of the second remote learning, predominantly with senior pupils, but with a few junior pupils. And then we got such good feedback from them, and we kind of changed some of the approaches that we used that we'll talk about today in relation to the questionnaires, that we decided just to run with it and trial it straight away. So we trialled it last year. We trialled it with 4 out of the 6 year groups, and it was so successful. This year we are now trialling it with classrooms, the classroom approach as well. So the idea is that there is one member of every faculty who's trained, which we've already done the training for this year, and they're taking it out into their classrooms, and then they're going to train their members of their faculty. Okay, so it is, we can't say anything more positive about the approach that we've used, and we do highly recommend it as such. Okay, so me first, then Lizzie, and then we'll leave the best to last, and we'll bring the young people in about their understanding of it. Alrighty, so To start with, what we found out when we implemented it is we needed some sort of guide. So the guide there, we have a Greif High guide that we've made up, but there is a plethora of information on Education Scotland and on the GLOW blog for information, and there is an excellent document that you can use, and that's essentially what we used for our guide in the first place. We also are trained by Nurture Network, and we've had trained by Education Scotland in relation to Nurture. In Renfrewshire, we call it the RNRA, so Renfrewshire Nurture and Relationships approach. So we use some aspects from the Boxall profile. And when I say the aspects of it, we're talking about really strategies of how, so what our guide was, we have our tool, we're going to use this tool to measure our young people's wellbeing. Then what do we do, especially if we realise that some of our young people are needing help with their wellbeing, or they're at crisis with their wellbeing. So we created a guide with strategies to help us help those young people in that immediate point during the meetings. And again, that is the guide that's went out to all faculty, so the classroom teachers can help as well. Having a core team is really important. It's the same as when you implement any new initiative. It's really important that we obviously have our senior management team involved for a cascade approach. We had guidance teachers involved and support for learning. So again, we were trying to cover all areas, especially all areas of pupil support. And then we initially, when we first trialled it, we discussed what were the 2 year priorities. So the year group priorities when we first came back after the second lockdown was S2, because they were the year group that missed half of first year and half of P7. So we already knew there was a high chance that those pupils would already be struggling. And then S6, because that was the final year. And again, that current S6 were the ones that were impacted the most in relation to no exams. Okay, and as I'm sure some of you young people were kind of excited about no exams, we very quickly realised that that does create problems with how they're perceiving their achievement within school, which obviously has an impact on their wellbeing. So after we took our time, met, took back some of the feedback, we realised that implementation process is probably the most important, because we're wanting pupils to relax into then being honest. And you'll hear when Jen and Katrina talks later on, it's about that honest, rich dialogue you get with young people. And as Lizzie will talk about, that it's not, yes, lots of pupils we were expecting to maybe score low because we knew what their background were or what their behaviour was like at that point in time. But it's also to do with the pupils that actually come into your class and they smile and they tick every box, and then sometimes that's not exactly how they're feeling as such. So we knew implementation was really important. So we devised the carrying out the actual profile. So the profile was carried out, it's 20 questions, and we do it through a Teams form. The pupil there and then completes the form, but they do it in PSE. And the beauty of PSE is because 9 times out of 10 they'll be with their guidance teacher, they're there with their what we would perceive as their key adult. It also is designed, the PSE is designed for us to have conversations about wellbeing all the time, so automatically they're relaxed, and that's what we're looking for. Some of the feedback we got when we done our initial trial was the pupils understood the questions, but they benefited from exemplars from it. So for instance, as you can hopefully see on the screen, the question 9 there, I am proud of the work I do in school, i.e. my work is good. So again, one of our wee kind of teaching points or key points was, so think about how you personally feel about your schoolwork. So they benefited from that kind of extended kind of description of that question as such. Again, fundamentally, we had to consider any ASN pupils. So we had, although we very carefully designed the questionnaire for it to be easily completed, what we also did is we read the questions out for those pupils that needed a reader scribe. And then, of course, not all people has access to a mobile phone. Not all schools have great access in relation to Wi-Fi. Pupils might not have data on the phone, so there was obviously paper copies as well. I get it was a no-brainer for us in relation to running it through PSE. As I say, the pupils will complete the questionnaire, and then this is where I was saying earlier about how easy it is to access the collation of the data, because essentially what's going to happen is once that pupil completes that form, as we all know through Microsoft Forms, there is an Excel spreadsheet generated. You are literally lifting the information from the Excel spreadsheet and putting it into a master template that you will be able to find on Education Scotland's site or the GLOW blog website. So all of the work is done for you. And again, any educationalist will appreciate this comment of our main point of at any moment, at any time during the day, is serving the needs of the young people in front of us. So not being able to sit for hours and interrogate data like we were previously when we did our own wellbeing wheel was a massive relief to us. So it was, again, it was a no-brainer when we got the training. So I'm gently and carefully putting this slide up because I know not everyone likes to see lots of data. I wanted to really showcase this slide more than anything else because I want to highlight the fact that when you have the master template, essentially, as I say, it's a simple case of copying and pasting. And then what's going to happen is you're going to have an Excel spreadsheet with lots of different worksheets that already has the data, the algorithm of the master template. It does it all for you. So what you're going to do is you can see the worksheets there. You've got point A raw results and point B raw results. So the idea is that you complete the profile at one point in the year and then you could complete it at another point in the year. The perfect scenario is at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. We tend to, at the moment, we were doing it at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. Classroom teachers, what they're going to do is they're going to have a wee bit more autonomy and they're going to trial it and see at the peak times. Is it before exams? Is it before report time? Etc. etc. So they're going to kind of play about with it. But the point A results is giving you that snapshot in time when that pupil completed it the first time, and the point B will give you once they've completed it at the end, whatever that period of time is. Summary graphs and percentage change to the graphs. You'll give radar graphs, it will give you bar chart graphs, because although we're talking about 20 questions in relation to the wellbeing indicators, it's also themed in 4 different areas, because the beauty of the profile is it also brings in some self-determination theory. So we're not just looking at the well-being of the child in relation to those indicators, but also looking at what are their motivations, what are their drivers as such. So the questions really hit home in relation to those individuals and what their needs are. The question changes and individual change will give you, as it says, individual information in relation to those pupils' scores. Okay. So when it's 20 questions, but what happens is each question has a score of 10, and that's what you're seeing in that screen with those yellow boxes. So those yellow boxes and red boxes are highlighting pupils who were low scoring in particular questions. So this section is what you would see at the end of the year or the period of time when you run the profile. So what you're seeing there is point A responses, point B responses, and then again, the master template, it does all of this for you. It therefore shows you any differences within those 4 distinct areas. Okay. Again, you're not having to number crunch at all. The entire spreadsheet, the entire template is doing that for you. So what I mean, Lizzie was talking a wee minute about what we did with that data. How did we actually take that data, interrogate it, analyse it, and then put it towards meeting pupils? But for me, the next slide also sums up how you can take it even further. So what we were doing is we were meeting pupils, and we were seeing here in relation to how do we meet the pupils and what do we do in relation to the scoring. So because you've got your 4 separate areas, it's up to you and your school, because you'll know your population, your cohort better. You need to create a threshold. So it would be a perfect world that you would meet every pupil that you think needs that meeting, but not every pupil will necessarily require that meeting. So we basically traffic light it. So we had our red pupils, our amber pupils, and our green pupils, and our threshold was looking over the 4 areas. And if they were below 25 in any of the areas, we would highlight it. And then what we would do is we would take it a wee bit further, and then we would just do an average in relation to those pupils. And then when we had our average, that would give us who's our red pupils, who's our amber pupils, and who's our green pupils. And we'd want to meet all of those pupils. Obviously taking a universal approach, because we're discussing this during PSC. There was a lesson about wellbeing and indicators and who they would check in with and who would be the support before they actually did the wellbeing profile. So even if their wellbeing came across as if everything was great, those pupils were still we were still accessing those pupils and discussing potential support in relation to their wellbeing, whether they needed it or not, because again, we're recognising it's just a snapshot in time. So again, it's up to yourself what kind of threshold you would want to create. And then finally, what we did is we had, oh, sorry, I'm just going to go back. I'm getting too excited. Finally, what we did is we had a final opportunity to look at those individual scoring. So if I take you back to this slide here, this top section here where you see the yellow boxes, what we were doing is we were meeting those pupils and just talking about those key questions that they scored low in. And there's another worksheet within the master template that can give you that information as such. So very, very, very rich in data, and there's very limited kind of workload that you have to do to create all of that data. Okay, so I'll pass you on to Lizzie to talk a wee bit more about the impact.
So what I'm going to be talking about is a wee bit more data, but also kind of in affiliation with how we spoke to the pupils about their scores on a human level. So how we start to kind of identify who we meet and why we meet them, but then how we kind of almost translate that into really child-friendly language, what the meetings consisted of, but then also how we tracked what strategies we then implemented going forward, and how we kind of as a wellbeing team looked at how many pupils were, for instance, referred to a counsellor, or how many pupils we said, okay, we think you should maybe have a little follow-up with guidance, and just to kind of look at that at the end of the year and think, right, even a certain year group might be, a lot of them didn't need a follow-up, and some year groups, there was a lot of heavy intervention after the meetings themselves, okay? So the actions spreadsheet that you can kind of see in front of you there, I've got the two arrows pointing to the two columns. So you've obviously got kind of actions and strategies that we would put in. We would do a very, very kind of brief statement about what we thought that child needed after a discussion with them about what was best. And although, so Sheena talked about the four sections, what I thought was really interesting was when you meet a pupil who has maybe been flagged up as, okay, they've hit the threshold, they maybe need a little one-to-one to make sure that everything's okay. It was very interesting to speak to them about what affiliation, that word itself maybe means, what agency might mean for them, autonomy. Healthy and safe was one that, I don't know about Sheena, but the pupils that I met, definitely, they knew what that meant. They understood why they were being asked about healthy and safe. But the other three categories were something that I felt I worked on with them to try and give them an understanding. So affiliation was probably the one, again, that a lot of them thought, oh, so you're telling me I scored really low on the affiliation, and they couldn't even imagine what that might mean until I might have said to them, okay, so you said that you didn't feel like you belonged to the school, or you scored really low on feeling a sense of pride of belonging. So it was that kind of language. And once we translated it, they kind of said, oh, actually, yes, I do remember reporting that I don't feel sometimes that I belong, or a sense of, again, that affiliation. Once you put it into a sentence, they started to remember maybe why they reported feeling a bit of low affiliation. Or the next word, agency. Again, it's not something that our young people really talk about, but the questions themselves are, when they report them on the wellbeing profile, those words don't come up. It's more that these statements are all kind of factored under our headings when we see them. So it was really interesting to speak to the pupils and say, okay, so your sense of agency is quite low. You maybe don't feel like you have a lot of independence when you're moving around the school, when you're making decisions. And just trying to kind of give them that connection to why they've been called for a meeting and what we can do to help them with these feelings. So the actions and on the right hand side, the kind of additional support, that might be anything from a referral to our external counsellors who sometimes come into the school, or it could be something like we're going to keep an eye on them. We might report back to guidance and maybe meet them again in a couple of weeks' time, and just to see whether their kind of low score was a bit of a blip or whether it's something that is consistently needing a wee bit of help. So yeah, next slide, thank you. So I'm going to talk to you a wee bit more about the pupils that Sheena mentioned earlier. So At Greif, and I'm sure in a lot of schools, we know the pupils that we expect to come up on the wellbeing scale as a wee bit lower. Their profiles are expected to be low in certain areas, and we totally could predict most of them. However, we actually found consistently that in every year group, there was a handful of pupils who we didn't expect to come up. And some of the indications of these pupils, if you think about when the classroom teachers greet them at the door, they have good attendance, so they're there all the time or most of the time. They engage with classwork and discussions. They're consistently good at their kind of test scores, and their attainment side of things looks absolutely fine as well. They seem happy, they seem content within themselves, they smile, they can interact with others really well. They're capable, they're independent, and they have good relationships. So all of these indicators for this group of people seem absolutely fine. And so we kind of started to refer to them as the under the radar pupils, because when we did the wellbeing profile with them in PSE, again, a handful of these pupils that we didn't expect to see flagging up would actually be called for meetings. And again, from a kind of human point of view, when these pupils came in for the meeting, a lot of the time for the first 5-10 minutes of that meeting, they would have that same mask on. And there was almost this little kind of, you'd have to break down that wall depending on how well we knew the pupil, whether we'd had a relationship with them previously or whether it was our first time. Occasionally, sometimes it would take them a little while to actually settle into the meeting and start to open up about maybe why they did score low. And often I actually found that it was in the last 5 minutes of the meeting, sometimes you would actually see a little bit of the emotion tip out, and some of the reasons that they had scored low would start to appear, but very gradually. And it might actually take another couple of meetings, maybe with guidance, to get to the root of why their well-being is not in a good place, but why they're presenting as a very fully rounded individual who's coping with life. So as you can see in the kind of the red highlighted numbers, it's just a wee breakdown of all the year groups, how many pupils were called for a meeting out of the whole year. And so, as I say, so 44% for S6, for instance, most of them we could have predicted which ones would be called, but there was a few that we thought, wow, we did not expect to see you here. And we wouldn't discuss that with the pupil, but as a staff, we thought, okay, this is a really instrumental part of the wellbeing profile. It completely gives you that extra level of trying to find out who are we missing and what can we do to make sure we are catching absolutely everyone who needs help. So I think if anyone is considering using the wellbeing profile, it's really fascinating to see which pupils are going to come up in the under the radar category, and I felt that was one of the most useful things that came out of it. Yep, ready for the next one. Thank you. So the mystery clicker that we can't see, she's still there. So we thought we'd share some of our general findings if anyone is considering using it, or if you're just interested to see what came out of it for us. I'll kind of talk through a couple of them. I'm not going to read them all out word for word, but firstly, asking the pupils for feedback after our first trial was really, really important for us. And again, I think the girls are going to touch on how it made the pupils feel to be asked these questions about their well-being. So I think for some of our pupils, when we first did it, they were almost slightly taken aback to be asked in such detail to kind of analyse how they're feeling, rather than here's a test, this is what you got for your attainment, this is what you're learning, this is what you've achieved in terms of academia. But for wellbeing, this was new to them, or for most of them anyway. So the feedback was really, really good to hear how it made them feel, to maybe feel valued. And again, the girls might touch more on that. In terms of what time of year to run the profile, that's something we think about a lot, and we certainly value the pupils' feedback on whether they thought it was a good time for them to answer these questions in terms of what else was happening in the school community during certain months. We know that there's like peaks and troughs in terms of busyness and stress, but again, there's never really a good or a bad time, because each individual doing the profile might be having a good day or a bad day, and it might have no correlation to what's happening at school at the time. But it's really good to have their feedback in a general sense of did we pitch it at the right time. The other thing that we found from it was that if you think long term about the staff you have in your school or your community and which skills might be best. So we've got a lot of staff that are really good with data and who will completely be super excited by the idea of putting all this data into a spreadsheet. And we've also got people who are very, very good at talking to children about their wellbeing. So finding the key staff members who have very kind of suitable strengths to deliver the profile is super important. Finding the right people to pull together as a team and try it out in different subjects. And having, Sheena mentioned the faculty leads as well, having someone in each faculty to kind of like oversee it, tie it together, and just like to push it forward and make sure we're doing it in the best way possible. The third thing, taking your time when you're looking at the data is hugely important, because it can be really overwhelming to look at all the red, amber, greens and to think, wow, there's a lot of bright colours staring at me here. And as an art teacher, colour theory has a lot to do with how you feel when you look at especially the kind of angry reds. So you do need to kind of chunk it down and think, right, okay, we have this many weeks, we want to meet this many pupils. It's totally doable. Either that or you think, right, no, we need to add in another fortnight. So it's that kind of like trying to not just look at it as a whole and just figure out which key staff members can chip away at it, and just approach it as a team and try not to kind of get overwhelmed with all the meetings that you have to get through, because it is doable. It does take a bit of organisation, but we got there. And a really good thing to point out is that sometimes the questions that the pupils score low on might not be because of wellbeing, or they'll be linked to wellbeing, but they might have scored low due to a learning and teaching issue. So that can be something that is really interesting. So if a pupil says, I'm never told what I'm good at, then that's obviously something that needs to be approached with them, but it's maybe not quite as a red alert as someone who says they don't feel safe. So they're still being flagged up, but it's for a different reason. So sometimes learning and teaching can totally kind of affect their well-being in an unexpected way. I'll just pick out the most important ones. What I would say as well is creating your own threshold that suits your school, because obviously everyone has a different cohort, a different community. And if you feel that actually we want to try and catch a few more people the first time we do it, and then we'll streamline it the next year, then again, it's all flexible depending on what works best for your school. And one of the most useful things I think that came out for our staff for your school improvement plan, if you're considering using the profile, it can be really good to identify something that in learning and teaching that you're already doing really well, but that the pupils don't realise is happening because the language isn't matching up. So for instance, something we found in the recent past, I can't even remember what year this was because of COVID, it's all kind of, the timelines have all gone a bit mushy. But something we found was the teachers here are really good at giving feedback. We know that we give lots of forms of feedback, verbal, we give kind of spontaneous feedback, we also give written feedback and obviously test results. But we knew as a staff we were doing that well, but the children weren't recognising what feedback was because they maybe didn't understand what that looked like, or if a teacher walked past and said, wow, you've been really good at communicating your ideas today, that was a form of feedback, but they might just think, oh, that was nice. They might not think, wow, I just got some verbal feedback from my teacher. So it was trying to actually change maybe our school ethos and our approach to feedback, and making sure the language was really child friendly, and that our staff were saying, today we are giving you some verbal feedback on what you're all good at. And then sometimes the wellbeing profile, like maybe the year after that question was flagged up, that it wouldn't be an issue again, because maybe the whole school approach has tried to identify that it was an issue, and maybe a slight language change can actually help pupils understand that they are being given good feedback. So it can be really useful to try and look at what's happening in general and what maybe needs to be communicated better or improved slightly. So those were our kind of main findings. And again, if anyone has any questions at the end about how we encountered specific parts of it, we're more than happy to chat more in more detail. But for now, I'll maybe pass you on to lovely Jenna and Katrina, who've sat so patiently waiting for their turn.
So as Mrs. Costello had said at the start, we're going to invite you to think about some of the results that we gained from using the profile. So what you can see on the slide here are just some of the different aspects of a young person's well-being that the profile has given us some information on.
So the first one is pupil voice, and it allows young people to reflect and voice their opinion on their own well-being and experience of school, and it's to make sure that they know that there is a way of having their opinions heard, and then they know themselves that their opinions are being taken into account, rather than just the teachers deciding, or like other people, that it's really coming from them and they're having an impact and they're having an influence on their experience. The next one is awareness of emotional needs, and it creates reflective experience for young people to focus on their own emotional needs and to ensure that they know how to do that and they have ways of doing that for themselves. And and then the next one is rich dialogue, and it begins a dialogue between adult and young person, encourages honest conversation around well-being and mental health. And it's just really important for the pupils to know that that is a really important aspect of it. And even if it's just a small conversation, having that dialogue with the teachers and the adults in the school and other pupils is just really helpful in general.
And our fourth one is it can provide a sense of self and understanding of the pupil's own needs, and it can support their mindset of their self-care. So maybe if it's been a stressful day, they know the ways that they can then calm themselves down. If they need to chat with a member of staff about ways that maybe they don't know yet that would help them to be able to calm themselves in an easier way than maybe getting far too worked up about it, thinking about it for a week. And so the next is relationships, which is working on teacher and pupil relationships, but also relationships with themselves and the community relationship. So it's just letting them know that any relationships that they have are valued, and we're always wanting them to be developed and increased in any way that they can. And then our final one is that it provides an understanding of well-being, but also supports us with motivation and drivers. So not only does it give us an understanding of the young person's well-being, but it can also give us information about their attainment and their just general school life.
So these are some of the responses from the profile that was done last year, particularly some of the low scorers and explanation about what they are. So first one's a low score for adults tell me what I'm good at. And this person, due to my surname being Simpson, I am always last or forgotten about during learner conversations. Can teachers not swap the alphabet around instead of A to Z all the time, do Z to A also? And when that response was given, it was brought up in a meeting with teachers and discussed on how they can improve that and more varied learner conversations, and not just keeping it the same order, so everyone feels like they are getting the feedback they need. And as for the same one, low score for adults tell me what I'm good at, because my other peers get written feedback on their work and I do not. This makes me think that my work is rubbish or that I'm rubbish at that subject. And just when you get that response, just taking into account that, well, yes, if a pupil is doing well and they seem like they're completely okay in that class and they're doing well on test, handing in classwork, all good, they still do want that feedback personally, just to know that they are on track, because while teachers may think that they are giving that feedback by just giving them the test and saying, well done, it's important that they know that the teachers are aware that they are understanding things, and just having a comment like, you don't need people who don't get feedback, it's just because we don't think you need it on this particular assessment or piece of work.
So some of the low scorers from the well-being side of things. So one was a low score for people who listen to me in school. And this pupil said, as I don't think it should be teachers that do all the emotional listening. We should have a full-time counsellor like other schools, as they're the experts. Teachers are for teaching and counsellors are for counselling. So as a school, we looked into getting, because obviously counselling it's so varied, like there's so many different things that people might need counselling for, like bereavement, trauma, family issues, friendship, bullying, the list goes on. So I think sometimes a pupil might not want to say all this stuff to their teacher, who then they're going to have to see in class teaching them maths. So to have someone who's separate from being in class, and they know that time when they can talk to them is their time, and it doesn't have to be the then person that they're seeing all the time throughout the school. And we're looking into getting the full-time one, and for all the different areas who can have this specific expertise and know exactly the stuff to talk about, and let the teachers do all their teaching, and they can worry about the pupils and send them to a counsellor rather than having to worry about them for themselves. And then the other low score one from wellbeing was, I can stand up for myself in school. And this pupil said, as I don't want to be seen as a gas, but want to stop and support some of the stuff I see, am I standing up for myself if I know that not doing that stuff is okay, or should I be getting involved? So in GRIFE, we have quite a bystander approach to things, so that pupils know what they can do in that situation, and that who they can go to if they see it, that they don't feel like they have to handle it all themselves, that they know the key staff that they can go to, and so they don't feel like a grasp, but they still feel like they're helping the pupil that was in need, and that they don't get into any further trouble, that they know it'll be okay if they tell this member of staff.
Okay. Okay. Hello, back to all of us. So what we've done is, as I said earlier, we've put up a slide. We've got Lizzie and our emails there. There is links as well that you can go to. So for Education Scotland, sorry, I realise I'm not on the camera, Education Scotland, and the Glow blog site for the GMWP. As you can see, I mean, we're obviously biased. We've went with the profile, and it's been, to be fair, it's been radical, the change. The fact that Lizzie and I were a wee bit tentative, taking it out and asking teachers to take the profile into their classrooms, knowing again that right now education is very, very busy for very different reasons. However, the feedback we got after we presented some of this at a whole school staff meeting in May, and we had a queue of teachers at the end of the meeting saying, sign me up, sign me up, sign me up. And that's not, I'd like to think it's to do with Lizzie and I's great presentation, but fundamentally it was because the evidence we could provide them to show the impact that having the profile is. And yes, we can all say that health and wellbeing is a responsibility of all, and we all do our best, but sometimes we don't answer the right questions at the right time, and that's where the profile kind of gives you that kind of backup to your teaching practice. And taking the profile into a classroom is very, very easy. It's the exact same process, except for you adapt the questions to, instead of being whole school, we're adapting it to within this classroom. And we've got some amazing feedback so far from these two departments, science and humanities. Almost all teachers are doing it already. And what they're saying is everything we're saying that happens in a whole school point of view, but within a classroom, which makes it even more intensive and rich in relation to the relationships that they're creating within their own four walls, as they call it, in relation to their pupils and their pupils' sense of belonging and safety and just general school experience as a whole. So sometimes it is flipping it and reframing it. Instead of seeing it as a whole school approach, it's what's happening in the class, and then great things are happening in the class, and then that's the ripple effect that goes out to whole school as such. So I'm hoping you've been given a real sense of our kind of excitement about being able to share this with you today, purely because, as I say, the impact that it's made for our pupils already. And please, Lizzie and I are more than happy to answer any questions just now, or please contact us if it is a kind of link up between schools, whether it's a Teams meeting, whether it's a you come out to us, we can come out to you. We're more than happy to support anything, but be curious. We invite you to think, to even try it out. It's a wonderful, wonderful programme.
Wow, Sheena, Lizzie, and the wellbeing leaders there, fantastic. What an incredible journey you've just shared with us in relation to supporting learner wellbeing in your schools. And I think the thing for me that, one of the biggest takeaway messages for me during the session is really around the simple small changes that can be made just by having those conversations with the young people in relation to their wellbeing. Changing the order from A to Z to Z to A, that's such a simple, basic thing for staff to be able to do to enable those conversations to take place. So, really big messages there. I'm delighted with the such a positive endorsement of the GMWP. I don't see any questions. There's not been any questions come through in the chat. If anybody does have anything, please feel free to pop something in the chat for us just now. Otherwise, just want to take a massive chance to say a huge thank you to all of you from Greif for sharing that story and sharing your journey about GMWP, and really wish you well as you carry on that journey. And to everybody who's joined us for the session this afternoon, if you do have any questions in relation to using GMWP in your own school or setting, then please feel free, as Sheena said, get in touch with them at Greif. They're the ones who are using it. But if you do have any wider questions about GMWP, please do not hesitate to get in touch with ourselves at Education Scotland. So thanks once again for joining us for our session, and huge thanks to Greif for their input this afternoon. Many thanks.